Hello, gents.
Hello.
Hey there.
All right, we can probably get started here. Feel free to put your attendance in the meeting list as well as anything you want to add to the agenda. Just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and it'll be uploaded to YouTube shortly after, as well as your participation in this meeting is an agreement to abide by the OpenSSF Code of Conduct. All right. So yeah, if folks want to, feel free to put stuff into the meeting notes for the agenda. The two main things I think for this week from my end were just as a reminder, 1.0 has the release candidate for 1.0 has gone out. So we probably want to start listing out tools that we know that are using SLSA, and that and see if we can either like attach to GitHub issues or something like that, like their sort of plan to adopt 1.0. And if there's anything missing, then we can kind of maybe put somebody to like open up a ticket or whatever. So that's one of the things. And then the second thing was just seeing if there's anybody else who wants to help also in the future sort of facilitate this meeting. Just noticing that the couple of times I've had to miss this meeting, the meeting just doesn't happen. And I just want to make sure that, like, hey, if I get run over by a bus tomorrow, that the meeting can continue on. So yeah, if folks are interested in helping co-lead, helping facilitate the meeting, definitely open to adding more names to the list there. Yeah, if I win the lottery tomorrow, yeah, I'll be on a private island somewhere. Okay, cool. So I guess if I were to go in and so we could probably start off with the tools and just start listing some of the tools that we know are trying to hit 1.0, or rather, we should start listing the tools that we know that are somehow using SLSA, and then we can go back and see, are they hitting 1.0? Do they plan to hit 1.0, and so on. The one from my end that I reached out to is Tecton Chains. And there is a GitHub issue for that. Let me pull that up. That's going to be issue number 728, which I'll post here, and I'll post in chat here. That was just a hey, supporting the 1.0 provenance spec. there. Let me also put in here also there. All right. So yeah. So that's the Tecton one. So just as a reminder, there's two pieces of the 1.0. There is the attestation spec. There's the attestation spec and the requirements. And so obviously some of the tools are just going to be tools that like obviously manipulate the provenance or do stuff with the provenance. And those will not actually have to, those tools themselves are not actually need to be hitting the SLSA requirements themselves. It's just the build tools. But those will just hit the provenance spec, but then there's the builds, which often will need to hit both. Cool. So do folks have other listed tools that they want to add in? Oh, so Docker build kit. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot. Build kit is not 1.0, but they are attaching the 0.2.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and do you know, I know some stuff that falls under Docker is open source, so I don't know if that particular component is. If not, does anybody know if there's any way that we can reach out to them just to be like, hey, 1.0 is coming out, just so you know?
Build kit itself is open source. I mean, a lot of it's open source, and they pull it back in with a commercial build of it, but build kit itself is open source.
Okay. So let me go and see if there is an open ticket. If not, we can just go and open one up. So let me just see.
Mike, as well, like the SLSA tooling, like SLSA generators and SLSA verifiers from the Google team, should those be added as well?
Yeah. Those should definitely be added as well. I know that with most of the folks like Laurent and Ian, I believe have already implemented some of it. I haven't. It's been so busy, I haven't been able to check to see if they've implemented it quite yet.
Yeah, I know Astra did sort of a prototype for the draft V1, and I know from NPM we are definitely going to implement V1 as well.
That is big news. I didn't know. So if I'm understanding this correctly, could we expect that in future Docker builds we would get these attestations for free?
Yep, they're there for free if you use BuildX today. It actually broke a lot of stuff because of the way they attach it, but it's there starting now.
Very cool. Thanks. Oh, I see. You have to attach this extra flag. Okay.
Yeah. You have to attach an extra flag to turn it back off, which is what broke a couple people because they now force a multi-platform image on everything. The way they attach it is a separate image out there.
Cool.
And
thanks.
I don't believe it is part of the official images yet, but I won't be surprised if that shows up before too long.
Yeah, just for my own understanding, so what is your so do you know if so I know it's generating the spec, but then with some of that stuff, right, like how do you get, let's say, a SLSA, like how is it hitting some of the SLSA requirements themselves? Or is it the idea here is that you would be running this?
This is just the provenance. This is just generating that. It's not even signed. So it's up to you to take it from there.
Okay. Yeah. Because I was just wondering, well, yeah, I think that it would probably only be able to hit SLSA 2 at that point. Even if it was to get signed. Just because, right? Because like the SLSA 3, with SLSA 3, you need to essentially prevent the build itself from Well, depends, I guess, what you. I'd have to read up more about it. Yeah.
Is there a tool actually that people can use to verify? I mean, I don't mean to verify whether the provenance is correct and all that stuff, but just whether the provenance you get is well shaped, you know.
So there are a couple. There is one that's been, so there's a Oracle open source team that's over, I think they're either out of Australia or Asia, who've been doing some stuff on that. There's also the SLSA verifier from our end, and it works pretty decently. So one of the things I've written up and I plan to redo for 1.0 is I wrote up a Q spec that like essentially just sort of says, hey, is this well structured? And it'll do all the verification, like also making sure that, hey, every place that's a URI should be an actual URI, not just a string. It should be
Exactly.
yeah, it should be a URI, and like things should look like configs and yada yada without going too deep there. So that's something that I've written up in the past, and I was planning on rewriting up for, if I have the time, for 1.0 as something we could have, just so that folks can just sort of take that Q spec and then just be able to include it wherever they need to, and just they automatically get the verification of the actual spec. Because if I were to gather what you're implying there, it's like, hey, are there things we can do to make it very easy for adopters of the spec to say, am I generating valid SLSA?
Exactly. And I was going to say, in fact, it's a SLSA validator that I want, or provenance validator more than a verifier, right? Which is the first level, is like you just said, making sure that it's well formed. I mean, my colleague Matt Rutkowski actually built this for SBOMs, because when we started trying to process SBOMs, we found that, there's a lot of garbage out there. And so obviously, with SLSA 1.0 coming up, we are trying to entice people to support it, but I think it would be wise to have some basic tools that people can use to say, hey, by the way, you might want to verify the output of your tool against this, just to make sure at least it's valid. I think
Cool,
if
yeah.
you have some that are like, available, probably it's worth pointing out on the SLSA dev website, to help people figure it out.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something worth adding into the notes there. And also put, SLSA.
Arno, how deep are you thinking about getting into that verifying? Are you just looking for required fields, or are you actually looking at the content of each of those fields and trying to dig in?
I think, the deeper we can go without getting necessarily into the verifying aspect, which is, whether you have the right signature and all that good stuff. I think, just making sure it's valid, at least on the surface, would be good. I don't have a specific idea in mind as to how far this should go, but of course, the deeper, the better. But it's kind of a lint tool, right, that I'm talking about.
Yeah. I really like, so some of the stuff that I've seen that I found that works really well. So I mean, personally, I'm a big fan of Rust, but some of the Rust like Serde stuff is really, or CERD, I don't know how they pronounce it, but is really, really good. Like I found that actually, yeah, similarly when seeing that a lot of tools that were generating SBOMs weren't actually generating SBOMs that were compliant with the spec. The Rust tool was actually really good because it could take in like actual specification definitions from a JSON schema or even through other stuff like XML and be able to generate it would automatically like a lot of the stuff in there was not actually written by people. It was actually just, you know, something that reads the literal definition of the spec, which is something that we should probably also, I know it's one of the things for SLSA that we're trying to do is like actually have a canonical definition of the spec in some sort of language so that somebody can go in, you know, a machine can go in and look at that and be able to parse through, which is why maybe something like Q or similar. But yeah, the thing there that I found very useful was like it was able to do stuff like, you know, even in stuff like lists or not lists, but maps inside of stuff like the SBOM hashes, right? SPDX says you must have at least a SHA-1. You can have additional things, but you can't not have a SHA-1. And so it's able to kind of, you know, figure all that sort of stuff out, which was really useful. Just wanted to, yeah, throw that out there.
That sounds good. I think, you know, as I said, I mean, if we could, if there are already tools out there that people can leverage, maybe building a list of those already could be a first step. And then we can see
Sure.
if there's more work that needs to be done. And we don't necessarily have to start from scratch, but maybe, you know, we can help others get up to speed with the latest version or something. And I suppose, I mean, there's this, you know, there's a plan to develop a certification program for conformance of SLSA. Eventually, these kind of tools could be leveraged in the context. But for now, all we have is a spec. And I figured a lot of people are going to say, yeah, I do SLSA, and they'll be producing garbage, maybe not even knowing it, right? It's like,
All
What
right, I just
about
created.
oh, sorry,
Oh,
go
go ahead. I was just gonna say, yeah, I just put in there for the build kit. I just created a ticket for SLSA 1.0 support, like a tracking issue.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to say, does anyone know if Testify Sec witnesses an implementation? It should be, right?
So Testify Sec wraps whatever, my understanding. I would need to talk to Cole. Cole can kind of describe it a little bit more because I know it's doing a whole lot of different things in there. I know that it's tracking a ton of stuff within the context of what's happening like on one particular server. So I would be curious to know if like he considers that a build tool, a wrapper tool, or what, because I know with SLSA, like some of the stuff, right, that's happening is that you have like an external observer that's actually looking into the build environment. Whereas I noticed that witness is mostly happening in the build environment. But I'd be curious because I haven't kept a close eye on too close of an eye on all the developments on Witness recently. But yeah, I'd be curious from, and probably worth putting in there as like you know, on in the document as like a potential, like reach out to Cole to see if he's doing that.
Okay, let me do that.
Thanks. All right, let's look through the list. Okay, so we got Tecton Chains, Docker Build Kit, npm CLI. Frederick, did you want to open up a tracking issue on the npm CLI?
Yeah, I can do that. I'm just,
Sure.
yeah, I will definitely do that.
Sure. Let's see. Let me also.
Actually, I won't do it now. I will do it later because officially it's only been announced that we're going to do it. So we don't really, I mean, there's no official release yet where salsa provenance exists. So I think I'm probably going to wait until we have that.
Okay.
Sorry, just to clarify, Frederick, are you suggesting that GitHub Actions will be producing attestations for free, or something else?
No. Well, I wish I could say that, but I'm not saying that.
I see.
It's only related to npm CLI. So npm CLI itself will have the capability of generating salsa provenances for npm packages built on any conforming build system, which today is GitHub Actions only, but hopefully we will expand that in the future.
Very nice. Okay, thanks. Sorry, I completely missed the context.
Yeah, no worries.
Oops, I created one for Salsa Verifier, and I'll add that as well. And I'll do the same thing here for the Salsa GitHub generator.
So, sorry, just to follow up with Frederick and to see whether I understand this correctly, is the thinking that is it part of the 6-door NPM RFC that the idea is to produce this SLSA or in total attestations during builds using build service that you control, and then the NPM CLI, when you try to install a package, would maybe try to see if these attestations exist, and if so, verify them before installing.
That is correct. So almost correct. So
Okay.
if we start at a producing side, so the plan is if NPM CLI detects that it's executing in a compliant build system that can integrate with 6-door, such as GitHub Actions, or I think down the road, I think BuildKite and GitLab is also being integrated with 6-door. So if it detects it executing in one of those build systems, it will automatically generate a signing certificate via FULCI, etc., and create a provenance and sign that and upload it to the package registry. And then due to how NPM install is working, it will not verify the attestations prior to the install of the package, but it will do it post install of the package. So it
Understand.
and then, yeah, taking it further, of course, there would be more, let's say, advanced policies to verify. But for now, I think if you run an NPM audit, it will see if the package have, or if it's expected to have a build provenance, and if it doesn't have, it will sort of make some noise about it.
That's very interesting. Now, when you say certified, sorry if I'm hogging the meeting. Let me know if I should clamp up. But one last question is, which identity do you plan to use? So let's say you find that you're running a GitLab and you NPM build and upload something. Which Fulcio identity would you use?
So for GitLab, I can't really say because I'm not super familiar with how GitLab's workload identities is working, but we will tie it to a workload identity, not to a personal identity. So if you take GitHub Actions as an example,
I see.
We will get the workload identity that's executing the job, and that will typically be a link back to the repository and the organization where that repository exists.
Interesting. And in this case, Fulcio would verify that GitHub is who it says it is, and GitHub would in turn, the action would bind the original GitHub repo and the action to the, okay, interesting.
Yeah, so it works by the CI provider relying on OpenID Connect ID tokens, where sort of the identity already exists in the ID token, which is a signed JSON Web Token. And Fulcio would know that, oh, this token is coming from GitLab, and here's where I can get the public keys for GitLab, and then I can verify the token. And then Fulcio would extract the claims for instance, the subject, and put those into the signing certificate that's handed back to the pipeline, as it's called in GitLab. And then that pipeline would sign the provenance with that identity.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah, we're excited.
Is this only for SaaS GitHub, or is it also self-hosted?
I would say it's primarily for SaaS due to the issue of integrating your self-hosted OpenID Connect provider with Fulcio, which probably won't happen due to, let's say, firewall reasons. And also, I think arguing over, let's say, the trust about your self-hosted runners would be harder to convey the community that you can trust them.
One of the things that we plan to do with stuff like Guac was to potentially allow folks to, through like a web of trust, to sort of say, hey, I have a Fulcio that's running that trusts these folks, and okay, you might be able to go back and say, well, okay, I trust the, I think on that front though, a lot of folks are looking towards like that SLSA conformance program, to do audits to say, hey, I looked at your environment and your self-hosted runners are running quite securely, or hey, your self-hosted runners are not running securely. I'm not going to sign off that you're SLSA compliant. I think those are some things that some folks are starting to talk about. Once again, that's once you get people involved, we'll see how real some of that ends up becoming versus how much of that becomes rubber stamps. We'll definitely see.
There's also an in-between scenario, which is GitLab SaaS with a self-hosted runner. And so instead of the self-hosted GitLab instance, is that middle scenario included, or is that excluded because you can't really attest to what's really happening on the runner?
For GitHub, let's see. So I'm not sharing too much information, but I'm pretty sure. No, it's public. So for GitHub Actions, the ID token contains a claim stating whether the runner is self-hosted or GitHub hosted, and that would be carried over to the signing certificate as well. So based on the certificate identity, you can understand if this was a build running in our runners or some random developers machine. Which
that's a good one. And then maybe in the future, who knows, when there's more trusted hardware, you could do some sort of remote attestation of the I already see Brandon is like, yeah, sure. But yeah, remote attestation of the self-hosted runner if you're really worried about its runtime. But that's the whole point. You don't need to in a good scenario with things like npm, correct me if I'm wrong here, especially if it's not compiled, you don't need to even trust the self-hosted runner. You could, if you had something like a source attestation, you could check that it correctly packaged the original source code.
Correct. And as I said, like in the end of the day, what you're getting when you're downloading an npm package is sort of code that will be interpreted by some interpreter. But it's definitely the cryptographic link between source code repository and package, which we try to sort of close the gap for with this. But still, if the runner was self-hosted, we couldn't really attest to that because the workflow identity says it's coming from this repository, you have no idea like what happens to the private signing keys and what other stuff that actually was uploaded with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some also there's some interesting work I've been seeing in the the confidential container space and similar around if you can verify that you're coming from, let's say, an approved secure enclave or whatever, then that self-hosted runner, you could be a bit more confident that it's only doing the right actions because of how because of the security constraints placed on that secure enclave. Once again, that's just, like, it seems fairly early on, but that's some other stuff that some folks have been sort of poking around with, where you can say, hey, I'm remotely attesting that yes, you're running on an approved device, and that within that approved device, you're also running in the secure enclave, which has no internet access or whatever, and you've only you've sent it over encrypted source code, and it has sent you back an encrypted binary, and that the host system because that encrypted binary is encrypted by like 1/2 of the it encrypts using a key that only you have access to outside of the secure enclave. You would be able to go back and say, okay, great, I know that it only ran in that environment, so even though it didn't run on my literal hardware under my control, I know that it could have only done the actions I told it to. At least, once again, this is all hypothetically. There's lots of folks who have lots of concerns with whether or not the guarantees in the secure enclave are actually valid or not.
So you were talking about the Salsa GitHub generator and verifier, and it exhibits some of the challenges that I think we have, which is, if you use it today, seems to be doing the right thing. You have no idea whether it's actually, it complies with the latest version of the spec or not. It could claim it does, it wouldn't know. And I think, we will only get to the right point in the industry when we can mix different tools, because the problem here is done by the same set of people. So they change the generator, they change the verifier along the same way, so it all works, which is great. I mean, it's better than nothing, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to bash them in any way, but ideally we would want to be able to mix match different tools from different independent implementations. And I'm a standards guy. A lot of standards organization have this kind of requirement, for standards to become standards, to have at least 2 independent implementations, if not more, so you can kind of do this test of interoperability and see if actually it works. Because I mean, it's great. We have all these different package and ecosystems that are going to start implementing Salsa. They're going to produce things, but if they also do the CLI that verifies it on the consumer side, you fall back into that same schema every time, where it's the same set of people who do the producer and the consumer side, and it doesn't mean it does the same thing as other people do for the different ecosystem. And ideally, we will get to a point where you can have, and this is, in fact, what I'm trying to say is also that, we shouldn't satisfy ourselves with just having one tool, because it's better to have at least a couple of different tools that come from different sets of people who may have a different way of reading the spec and so on.
Yeah, no, definitely agree there. Well, I mean, I know that there's Tecton Chains, which is doing some of it. I know that with some of that, there's been some push on the Tecton Chains folks to maybe be a bit quicker in adopting, let's say, 1.0, because with some of it, it's been quite slow. But at the same time, also, I know that under OpenSSF there is Fresco, which relies on Tecton Chains, but is trying to sort of be another one of those tools that can with the idea there being let's pull in dependencies that are Salsa verified or whatever. But 2 solid producers for the same project. Yeah, that's definitely what Brendan brought up. I think is the big issue right now. And it's something that I know that we wanted to do, what we're calling the Salsa rebuilder, right? The ability to kind of go back and say, hey, can I take something like a Salsa attestation and then rebuild, do stuff and do all sorts of things could you transform that Salsa build that ran in some way, turn it into in Toto layout so that future builds can now know that they're supposed to be doing it this way or whatever.
Yeah, it's non-trivial because every one of these builders is different. So it's not easy to say, if I build it in GitHub, try to build it in GitLab and get a comparable Salsa output that you can say, okay, both of these did similar things, but that would be a nice endpoint if we can ever get there at some point.
Yeah, one of the tools I did want to actually shout out, if I could just find the link to it, was the tool that Oracle was working on. Let's see. Let's see, we're somewhere in here. Might be under this also tooling. I will figure this out. Oh boy, too many salsa, too many Slack messages to. Let's see. Ah, they call it macaron here. I'll post it in here. The folks who are working on that are APAC, so they haven't been able to actually demo anything, but we're trying to kind of get an APAC friendly thing there. But yeah, this tool was actually pretty cool. I think it's there's a couple of things that they're trying to verify, which I'm not exactly sure if they can, but macaron is essentially a sort of salsa. It's an independent salsa verification thing, and it actually does it does the sort of enterprisey, it generates HTML reports and stuff like that, which is it's pretty cool from what I've seen. Let me see if I can find some of the other links here. Let's see. Yeah, let me copy this. So in the Slack, there's some attachments there that are like a cube, the policy and HTML and sorry, the reports for the actual salsa, like reading through the salsa and trying to verify and trying to essentially verify that it is in fact using the approved builders and all that sort of stuff. I think it has a lot to do, but a lot to go, but it's pretty neat. Yeah, and to Kishan, yeah, I think that's one of the big things coming from Salsa is like who's actually generating that that attestation, right? Because the view from like the secure software factory standpoint is that you need to have something outside of the sort of secure, I don't want to say security boundary, but outside of what's running the build, observing the build, like actually peering in. And it depends exactly what your threat model is and yada yada. Like if you run, some folks might say, yeah, the container is a security boundary, which I know for most folks is not actually true. But there's some stuff there. That's kind of why with like the secure software factory, the thing that we had done was we had that idea of the workload identity plus a thing that's observing the build. And because you can do that, you can say, well, I'm running this container. I know that the control plane can't tamper with the build itself because that would invalidate the workload and it would just get shut down and or not get signed. And then in addition to that, you can then also have something like using eBPF or whatever to sort of verify from the outside. Is this thing trying to make weird network calls and so on? But then, of course, the thing there, right, is just the more isolated and ephemeral you can make that environment, the just sort of safer you feel. Because if the job doesn't have network access, okay, cool, that's a whole class of things I don't need to worry about anymore, at least hypothetically.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, especially a comment about being able to run it on a trusted runner. Basically, that would solve two problems at once here. Instead of trying to do, let's say, a GitLab runner producing one and then NPM inside the image running one. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I can add like, so let's say in this case, like your example, you have, let's say a layered approach where the CI provider spins up a VM, and in that VM you run a container, and in that container you run a build. At least in GitHub, what the workload identity would be, it would be like the identity of the ephemeral VM. Then whatever you run in terms of, let's say the build workflow is, let's say, large, and you potentially have a risk of leaking artifacts between the different steps. That's not something that we will really, let's say, attest to. We will only attest to this is the identity that spun up the job.
I see.
And then sort of you as a consumer would need to make sure that you trust that specific workflow to produce what it's claiming to produce. And related to what I think Mike was saying, there is with the Google team, they're working on the SLSA provenance generators. And the approach they are taking is that they are creating a reusable workflow that you can use to build your artifact. And by doing so, you pretty much have a strong boundary where the interface is pretty much a Git repository. And then you hand off the actual execution to them. And so you as a maintainer of your package can actually not influence the build, because they will clone the repository, they will run whatever commands, and then they will package and upload. So if that is the case, the actual workflow identity from Fulcio will be a reference to the reusable workflow, and that is not something you can't forge. So that is a way of getting a stronger trust model on, in this case, GitHub Actions. I'm assuming, let's say for Circle CI, we can do the similar thing with an orb, but that's just me guessing like what the future might bring. But for GitHub, I know the Google team already have that capability by providing these reusable workflows. And in essence, that would pretty much give you that something that you can use to claim SLSA level 3. The approach we are taking for now, you would only be able to claim SLSA level 2, because in the end of the day, the provenance is actually generated by a program that's under control of the maintainer, which is not the case with a reusable workflow.
I see.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
it's not, you can't really forge the provenance per se, because the primary parts of the provenance is extracted from the ID token, but still we don't really know that you're actually uploading, let's say, the artifact you're supposed to be uploading. That you still have the traceability, so you can go back in time and see what was actually uploaded. You know, or the only thing, or put it like this, we attest to that whatever is happening from this repository, but we can't attest to what's actually being uploaded. Whereas a reusable workflow would give you stronger promises, because you pretty much say, here's my repository, build it and pack it and upload it. And you can verify the reusable workflow, and you can see, it's doing npm install, it's doing npm publish. Okay, I know it's actually doing what it's supposed to do.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So are you saying that right now, at least the GitHub Actions runner, the provenance generated doesn't trace through the steps, or did I mistake something?
No, you're correct. You're correct.
Okay.
So basically, the approach we're taking is that when you're running npm publish, and we detect that you are, let's say, in GitHub Actions, npm CLI itself will generate the provenance and sign it via ephemeral key from Fulcio and publish it. But still, you could easily replicate that in, let's say, a few manual steps and I'll upload whatever you want. And that is sort of the gap we're closing, or Google is closing, with the reusable workflows they are offering. So we only get the traceability. Whatever is published was published from this repository using this Git commit. But whatever that workflow happened, we do not know. You have to look for yourself. But we promise you it came from here.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the big complicated things, right? Is because it pretty much limits what the end user can do in that reusable workflow way, because it has to be supported by the reusable workflow. And then, because this is actually something that was being discussed in the Slack a little bit, is some folks, who work at various enterprises are like, hey, I can't use the OpenSSF reusable workflow. I need to fork it and pull it into my own environment. And then it's like, well, then you lose some of those guarantees, because the idea, right, is if you're in the open source space, somebody can always go back and audit and look at that reusable workflow and say, oh, that reusable workflow came from OpenSSF. These are the lines of code it ran. And assuming you trust GitHub to be doing the right things, then you know that it only ran those steps. You know, whereas even if, let's say, in the case of NPM, it's like, once again, SLSA doesn't protect you against like malicious source code doing malicious things, but it does sort of guarantee that the malicious source code was only built using these commands, so that you know, if you have additional, let's say, security steps in there, you know those security steps still ran, and yada yada. And I think that sort of thing is also an interesting challenge that some folks are bringing up. Is like, can there be ways? Some of it's going to be audit and yada yada. Oh, so this is so technically this is not a Google product. It's actually SLSA. It's OpenSSF's. It is under us. It's just that the majority of devs who are working on it, I would say, like, you know, 9 out of the 10 devs who are working on it are Googlers, which is another thing that we should probably.
Oh, I see. So the clarification here, I see. Okay. So the clarification here is that you're running that reusable workflow elsewhere.
No, you're running it in GitHub Actions, but
see.
because you as a maintainer cannot influence the steps taken to produce the artifact. I think that's the differentiating factor.
Yeah, because like the idea behind it is like the same way that at a company you might say, here's our default pipeline, you must follow the steps of the template pipeline, right? You don't get to just go in and say, oh yeah, I'm going to remove this scanning step, or I'm going to remove this linting step. It's like, it's part of the template. You just give the source code. You're saying here, like, I am using this NPM reusable workflow. I can't transform that reusable workflow to run different steps, right? I can't get it to run fake NPM because it's like, no, the reusable workflow is managed by OpenSSF and SLSA, and is open to the public for auditing and introspection and verification.
I see.
Yeah.
But that assumes that the authors themselves, the original GitHub repo, the source code repo, maintainers can't tamper with this actions workflow.
Correct.
Yeah. So and in general they can't, because the reusable workflow is coming from OpenSSF and not their own. And so what the thing that, from my understanding, that GitHub provides you is GitHub provides you that information. Like if they are claiming to use the reusable workflow and they're not,
you would know. I see.
Yeah, you would know. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So there's some sort of, even if you try to cheat and say the bill service basically would tell you, but this is not what he actually ended up using. I see. Okay.
Now there is definitely some stuff I think that's worth investigating, which is there's probably a lot of interesting typo squatting that could probably be done to give folks the idea that they're probably like they might think, oh, I'm using the reusable workflow, and it turns out like they're using the open SSG reusable workflow, and other people will not be able to verify it, but they're thinking they're producing stuff, and it turns out all their source code is being whatever.
Sorry, one more question. How do you know what's official and what's not? Presumably the build service like GitHub Actions needs to know that this is the canonical OpenSSF, whatever.
So for that, this is still something that's sort of, let's say, in the flight, but we haven't taken a hard stance because I think this in the end ties down to verification policies. So just because, let's say, OpenSSF provides one that's ready to go, maybe we can endorse it, maybe we won't. But let's say Oracle as an example, because we have mentioned Oracle earlier in this call. Maybe Oracle produces a workflow which is equally good, and a random maintainer building a JavaScript package will probably trust their workflow as well. So it probably might be something that the consumer says, I trust these 5 workflows. So it's probably not for us at NPM to say these are the one you should use. I think
you can
it's more like
you can basically assign and say that this is what was used.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're gonna do. Yeah, we probably won't sort of say this is good one, this is bad one. We can probably say this is proven to be true. And then it's up to you to decide which are the workflows you are trusting in your use case or organization. We may endorse, let's say, the SLSA version by OpenSSF, or we maybe not. I don't know. We have to see sort of what approach we're going to take. But this is something we, and I know as well, Pizza has been working on this, but there are future ideas like, can you as a maintainer say, when I'm building my package, I'm expecting to see this workflow being used. So let's say a repository attack that changes the trusted workflow to some untrustable workflow. It can be that either the registry or the CLI itself will detect that and say, no, this is not the expected workflow used to build this package, so I will reject.
You would need some sort of a policy for that.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Cool, thanks. I should have taken a deeper look at the generator, but I'm glad I learned a lot today.
Yeah, and with some of the tools that some of us are trying to build out there, right? Like with stuff like whether it's Guac or some of these other things that are kind of coming up, we're trying to kind of figure out, how can you delegate and distribute trust, and how can you, because I think some of the stuff that folks are starting to talk through as well is like for folks who are like, I can't use a SaaS to build my stuff because I have requirements. I need to build it internally for closed source stuff as well.
Right.
Folks are talking about, like with the SLSA conformance program, you could have a third party that's been approved by let's say the LF to do these audits, and they can audit some of these, companies' build systems. And so you might say, yes, software vendor X has been audited. And so if you trust, let's say the LF to sponsor that or whatever, you can say, okay, great, this person has certified this thing that it is, a high level of SLSA, like SLSA 3 or whatever. Cool. I trust that company that does that audit. So now I'm going to trust those build systems. Because like, obviously some of this is going to be a bit easier to verify out in the open. But in cases where it's not out in the open, you might need to rely on like somebody to do some sort of certification. All right. Anything else in the last 2 minutes? All right. If not, see you all in a week. And remember, if there's any tools that come out that you see, feel free to add it to the doc. As well as, if there's not already an existing sort of 1.0, SLSA 1.0 support issue for those projects, feel free to add one and add it into the doc. All right, cool.
Thanks,
All
everybody.
right, thank you.
Yeah.
See you all next week. Bye.